All right, hello everyone. I am Andrew Dahlberg, and this is the Future of Debate Town Hall presented by the Champion Briefs Institute. I'm really happy to moderate this discussion today. I think it's an important conversation about where we see this educational community headed. We live in a very unique political era, and I'm not talking about a specific side. I don't want this to be a partisan discussion, but I do think that we are in a time where there's an unsureness in the atmosphere of our political system, and that's both in the United States and abroad. Now, debate exists as a center of the education community that specifically interacts with politics in a very unique way. Debate is inherently political. If we had debate questions, resolutions, bills, and resolutions in Congress, or any other topic in public forum, Lincoln Douglas, and policy debate, if we had topics in those events that were one-sided, that there was a clear answer to, then they wouldn't be debate at all. So debate is inherently a political event, which is why it's so important to discuss debate in the context of the political times in which we currently live. So we're going to have a discussion today in front of all of you. I'm going to introduce the moderation in just a second, but we're going to talk about that we're going to talk about debate through the scope of this unique era that we're living through right now. So with that, I'd like to introduce the panelists. First, we're going to start all the way on my right, your left. We have Rhonda Smith. She has taught for 28 years and has been coaching debate for the last 20 years, and for the last 10 years have been at Plano West. She also serves on the Texas Forensics Association Executive Council and the NSDA Lone Star District Committee. Next, we have Dave Houston, who is a coach at Colleyville Heritage High School in Dallas, Texas. He is an NSDA board member and an NSDA Hall of Fame member. He is also very specifically embarrassed about the length of his ribbons this weekend. He has longer ribbons than his tie, and I think we should all just be aware of that. Next up, we have Jonathan Alston, who is a coach at Science Park High School in Newark, New Jersey. He's been coaching for 25 years, and is on the NSDA LD Wording Committee. Here we have Megan West, the co-director of the Champion Briefs Institute and a curriculum supervisor for civic engagement in Broward County Public Schools. She was the 2004 NSDA champion in impromptu speaking. Finally, we have Martin Page, who is the assistant director of the Champion Briefs Institute and a speech and debate coach at the Del Barton School in New Jersey. He's also on the PF Wording Committee. With that, I'm going to open the floor up to the panelists. We're basically going to have a discussion. Rather than me asking a specific question to a specific panelist, I'm going to pose the question to the entire group, and they're going to have a discussion, which I'll lead and guide in the right direction just to keep things moving. So the first thing that I would like to discuss, again, in the context of this unique political time that we're living through, is what do you all see as the biggest problem that students and coaches within the debate community will face during the next few years? I'll leave it open for any of you to start.
I'll start. Hello. I think this is just an umbrella statement, and I hope, Andrew, to your point, this will start the discussion. The biggest problem I see, and to expand a tiny bit just for a second on my role, I oversee all of the debate programs in Broward County, which is the 6th largest school district in the country. We have about 132 debate programs, elementary, middle, and high. And I think our biggest challenge is one that from the district that has 2 programs to our district that has 132 programs is really dwindling resources. And I think that a lot of what we are dealing with is that we have X school, as I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with, that has unlimited resources and funds. Maybe it's a private school in your district, to other school in a tiny corner of the county that has no resources, no parental support. And I think we need to continue to find ways, not only as coaches, but as districts and as larger bodies, to be able to support those schools that really don't have the resources. I think especially in the political climate, Andrew, you and I have had discussions before that finances are tighter in a lot of things because people are unsure of the future, and that means that school districts are too. Public education, we don't know about the status of our funding in the future. And I think that something we can do as a community is continue to make sure that we're finding resources for those schools that are underfunded and have dwindling resources to make sure that they can continue to participate in this activity.
I think that also points to the value and us being able to talk about the value of this activity. I think many of us have read studies that what's happening in the media and what we're seeing in the media is if I have a particular political point of view, I get my news or my information from a source that fits that point of view, that caters to that point of view. And as a result of that, we've sometimes lost a balance in our news reporting, and it just doesn't seem to exist. And I think debate uniquely is an activity that forces us to look at balance, that when we see a topic, we see our political points of view, or our liberal point, or, our liberal or conservative points of view, say, well, that's this side of the topic that I'm going to come down for. And I think it's necessary then to take our students, who sometimes seem to have that same bias, and force them sometimes to debate on a side that they may not necessarily personally agree with. And I think it's important for us to do that, to get people to take an opposite point of view from what they have, and to make sure that they are looking at a number of different sources which give us that balance that we need to look for, I think, for good decision making.
Yeah, I would probably have a slightly different take in that I don't see this time as unique politically. I think that there are always controversies. There's always a lack of resources. There are always real deep arguments that go on within the community. And there are always questions about who is included and who is excluded. I think that we just need to understand that there are certain things that make debate special in terms of promoting, and that is research, evidence. We try to ground our differences in something. And I think that teaching people how to ground differences in evidence, in research, goes a long way in terms of dealing with a lot of the controversies, not just of now, but of each era. And I think that questions of inclusion of students and resources, is something that is not a new thing, right? Like, it is something that we're always fighting. But I think that, I'm at a public school, and we're a publicly funded debate team in a public school. And there were not just myself, but many coaches who came before me, and people within the district who have to love debate as much as the coaches. So it's the parents have to really talk to the district. The district has to believe in it. And often districts always have to put their money where their mouth is. And there are always priorities. There are always things that are cut. But I think that they understand the value of debate and what we teach to kids' lives, how it expands all the other things that we normally teach. I think that that can be a way to get some of the funding that we need, because it becomes in the school's interest and the community's interest, and there's always this constant outreach as well.
So on the topic of kind of the financial positioning of schools within the district and within the rest of the nation, I've always seen this tournament, the NSDA National Tournament, and a lot of other national tournaments out there as kind of a collection of people from a lot of different diverse regions of the country that come together to exchange ideas in a different way that is possible on just the local level if you're just talking to people within your same school district. But it does change when you're interacting with people that are very different from yourself and have a very different way of thinking based on where they're from. So how can the community kind of work together to still allow those same kinds of opportunities, especially when there's a lot of schools that do not have the money to travel outside of their region, outside of their district, to compete at tournaments? And especially at the national level, a lot of schools and school districts don't have the means to send their students for a very unique experience with those larger tournaments.
I would actually push back a little bit on that, because I think that, I teach in Newark. Newark is a public school district. It is economically poor, right? Like, in terms of the population around. But there's always ways to prioritize. And I think that when you deal with, even if you're dealing in a poor district, if you get the people within your community, parents, the politicians, the educators together in the same room, and get them on the same page, then you can do a lot more than you thought you could have if you just looked at the economic demographics of your particular community. But that does take a lot of work. Like, it takes you lobby, right? Mm-hmm. You have to lobby parents. And parents will lobby for you. right? You have to lobby parents. Parents will lobby for you. You have to specifically lobby your educational officials. You have to lobby your political officials, because you have to lobby foundations, right? Because in areas, especially especially in areas where if poverty is considered an issue, or economic inequality is considered an issue, well, we're debaters. We teach people how to persuade people about things. You talk about yourself. Talk about the issue that you think is most important. We teach advocacy skills. We have to advocate for ourselves with our communities.
I think the unfortunate thing about a tournament like this is we're going to start in a competition tomorrow where each one of those events has at least 200 kids in it, or 200 teams, or whatever it is. And unfortunately, on Tuesday, once we get through round 6, that 140 of those teams, or so many of those kids, are going to feel like losers because they didn't get those 8 ballots, or they didn't get those ranks they needed to get into those top 60 and everything. And it's like, they're doing this. And I think I've come to the realization, I think, that it's not just about the wins and losses and everything else. It's about doing it, getting kids involved in this process. And even if you're not doing it at a level that is quote unquote successful, you're doing it. And you're engaging students in critical thinking. You're engaging students in the building of arguments and the understanding of argumentation, and getting them to question how they see things. And that's what I've told my students. I teach in a very conservative area, and I tell them all the time, if you do nothing else but question why you believe what you believe and what you value, then this activity has done its work. It's done what it's supposed to do, because it's when we question that we begin to try to figure out what the answers are and why we believe or why we do the things we do, and whether or not the actions we are taking are actually upholding the values that we have. And I think the more we can get students to do that, the better off we're going to be. That's why I'm excited about some of the programs that we are sponsoring as the National Speech and Debate Association. I think I'm becoming a big fan of the Big Questions debates, because I think it puts it in a local area where you're sometimes not even competing in a tournament. You can do it within your school, and it's getting your school to ask some questions and get them involved in a debate process, which I think is really important. And the more we can do that, I think the better off we're going to be.
No, I really agree with you, Dave, in terms of access. And one of the things that we do is we've started providing free after-school tournaments for all of the students in our district, which means that we have anywhere from 200 to 700 students that once a month come to a free competition after school. It's a huge opportunity for them to be able to not spend any funds, but still come get access to the opportunity. And again, it gets more expensive when you get to tournaments like nationals. But one other thing I think is important to note here, Steve Shapaw shared with all of the district committee members at our luncheon today that there's $500,000 available through the NSDA next year to schools. Big Questions is one example of that. There's money out there. Yes, the lobbying has to occur, asking has to occur. You have to have people that are advocates for the activity, but there's also a lot of opportunities sitting there. So I think it's kind of a two-part. You have to not only provide those opportunities free for your students, as many as possible, but then figure out what existing funds are available to be able to make opportunities like this tournament accessible for them as well. And I know Marty wants to say something.
Well, just on that point, I think that the reason why Broward County, and I'm from Broward County originally, I think the reason that Broward has been so successful in having those after-school tournaments and really building infrastructure around speech and debate was because the lobbying started early. I mean, there are other districts across the country that are doing very similar things, and it all does start with the lobbying and finding the resources that are available. So it's very good to know that the NSDA provides a lot of those resources. There are other organizations out there that are striving to create this kind of infrastructure in different school districts to open up those kinds of opportunities.
I would just going to say, sort of going back to what Dave was saying a couple minutes ago, the idea that there's value beyond the win-loss record, beyond whether students get past noon or 1 o'clock on Tuesday in their main events, in the fact that students are doing this and debating and having these conversations. I think one of the big challenges facing debate over the next few years is making sure that the debate round is a productive space for an actual clash of ideas and actual argument interaction to happen. So we talk a lot, and I often see rounds where there is great conversation about important issues happening. But I also think I've seen, particularly on the national circuit over the past few years, students taking shortcuts to win debate rounds rather than having real arguments interact and real important debates. And I often feel like the debate rounds that I'm watching are two ships passing in the night. So I think on a more micro level, in terms of what's happening in the debate round, as we're in this political climate, as we're trying to have these really, really important discussions, we need to make sure that we actually are having our students analyze arguments, respond to arguments, and discuss the issues rather than just trying to win.
Well, I think that, to speak to both of you have just said, first, I think that local leagues are really important. Like in Newark, there's, like when you're talking about kids who, when they're not champions, but they feel like they haven't really contributed. But that's just not true, because you have to build your local leagues, right? And a lot of my best students, a lot of my best competitors, a lot of my kids who are not my best competitors are very valuable to my team, because they have pride in being from Newark and being a Newark debater and doing the things to build a league, both when they're in high school and when they graduate from high school. They'll come back to coach. They'll come back to judge. My students judge for free at our tournament because it saves us money. We're able to do that, right? So it's about pride in the local league. It becomes really important in building the institution that you talked about. As far as in terms of in-round argumentation, again, I think that's just not new, right? Like I think that the reason why we are judging debates is because ultimately it's an educational activity. And we are teaching people to be critical, but there are going to be a lot of debate that we're going to not like and not like what we see. And especially true when you have different people from different backgrounds coming together. People are going to say things that other people don't like. And I think it's up to the adults in the community, the coaches, to actually, have conversations with other coaches. If kids are doing things that you don't like in a debate round, and the decision or win-loss and the comments after the round aren't enough, have conversations with coaches, because that ultimately is the way the institution progresses. And I think that, so I'm never one to have like moral panic in debate, because like people have argued the most racist, sexist, horrible things, right? And very offended, they don't win the round, right? I probably have had conversations with coaches. I also coach my kids to make some arguments in response. So yeah, do some rounds get heated? Of course they do, right? Are some rounds kind of like painful, or some rounds tough? Yes. I don't think anything's wrong with that, as long as there are adults who like moderate. And after the round is over, there are rounds that have been very heated. After the round's over, you have to have coaches who will be able to have conversations so that the dialogue, the education can move forward. But I think it really is about having adult coaches. I think one of the problems that you're talking about is that if you have coaches who are just out of high school, first year out, and they're the main coach and they're responsible for the education, well, if you're first year out, generally you are never going to judge or coach the same way 2 and 3 years from now. There's like, to a great extent, I think that the problems that you're talking about in terms of like rounds and education and rounds, I think when adult coaches who are older, have an understanding of what their program should stand for and don't cede the authority for coaching to simply younger members, I think that solves a lot of the problems of pedagogy and education, and is it valuable or is it not valuable?
And then I'm just going to add to that. I think one of the kind of issues that we're dealing with is that a lot of kids do see divisiveness, and they're trying not to get in the middle of the divisiveness. They want to win the round. It's not for them, about politics as much at that moment as it is about winning the round. And they know their judges are going to have a certain mindset, and they want to make sure that they are not offending their judge. I think that's a really important lesson. And I don't see it as a problem. I see it as part of like the positive that can come out of this activity when they learn that there is a way to unify people and there is a way to make a point without being offensive, and they learn to find the common ground. I think that's really what we're trying to teach them in the first place. And in debate rounds, they can learn to do that a lot more effectively. They have evidence to support their ideas. We need to make sure we encourage that. To me, that's really where we're headed.
Yeah. And I think that presenting the right ideas and kind of framing the discussion as the adults in the room and the coaches that are guiding students to have the right discussions is just as much about the questions that we pose to them as it is about the environment that we present to them. So do you all think that there are ways that the structure of debate that we have created as a debate community, and some of the people on this panel have had a big part in shaping, are there parts of that structure that can be changed to maximize the educational environment that we're presenting them? Not just the discussion that they're having within that environment, but the actual framing of how they're being asked to debate that can make it more educational.
You talking about like speaking time?
Yeah, like rule changes or anything in the way that debate is held that can make it more educational.
I'll just put in a plug this way, is that one of my functions on the board of directors is to serve as the chair of the Competition and Rules Committee. And yes, that is exactly what it says. It's like, you know, when you say to yourself, well, there ought to be a rule to do this. Well, I'm the person that you should be sending that thing to and saying, we want your committee to consider this. I think, I don't know, as far as structure is concerned, policy debate, I think, has changed so much in the last, 20 years or so. Much more, I'm finding that, the alternative arguments, the critiques, those kinds of arguments are very much a part of this activity that you wouldn't have found that 20 years ago. And you're also starting to see that in Lincoln Douglas much more than you would have, like, say, 10, 15 years ago. Public forum, I think, the structure of the round has not changed since its implementation. And I think there are some very definite things that could be changed with that. And please don't go back and say, well, Dave said this. Because, I think, things that have been proposed to me as a member of the committee, and it's something that formally I think at some point in time we need to do, are things like taking away the crossfire, the grand crossfire. I don't know about you, but I've never looked forward to listening to 4 teenagers just yell at each other. That's not my favorite time. And then either adding then some time to either preparation time or to the speaking time, like the summary or the rebuttal or something somewhere along those lines, giving a little bit more time there. The coin flip, what do we do with that? Do we keep the coin flip? Do we set sides? Because those of us that have ever been in a tab room with public forum realize what a nightmare that is, trying to figure out sometimes what side people were on and what they weren't. So I think that structure, I don't know, I think all of them, add to, some things. In Lincoln Douglas, there was a talk a lot of years ago about how there was such a negative skew and that you needed to do something to balance that 1AR speech. But I don't know, Jonathan, is that kind of going away, or is that more?
I think people learned how to deal with the 4-minute 1AR, and people are looking at how to do the affirmative speech. Now there are still people who talk about that, and I think that's when coaches have conversations with coaches, and I think that those are just the natural progression of things, right? There are some tournaments that will try things out, and there'll be some rules and that'll be fine. But I think that I think that in addition to just the structural changes, in terms of the actual debate times, like I know policy went to 5 minutes for rebuttals as opposed to 4-minute rebuttals for that reason. But I think in addition to that, it's also in the evaluation of rounds. I think that judge diversity is an important thing. I think that a lot of people have been talking about that, but like there are tournaments where the only judges of color, the only black judges who would be in the round or would be judging would be from my school or from my city. I think that we as a community have to have some conversations of, if you have like all white male panels consistently, is that a good thing? If you don't have women who are on panels or consistently like pushed off of panels, or we have black judges who are consistently pushed off of panels, is that a good thing? And that's a coach conversation, right? Like, because that's like, what type of event do we want? What type of event is, what are we really promoting to the students that we have? And do we have an obligation that is as important as a competitive one? And I think that that's a conversation that I know that was big at the TOC, that's been big. I know Blake does a concerted effort to address that. I noticed that that was being talked about seriously here at this tournament as well. So I think that that is something, a way to bring people into the, like you were talking about expanding communities, bringing people in who haven't been brought in before. And I think that is part of how you bring people in who haven't been brought in before. Because, you know, it's a thing when I have a black female debater who for years had never been judged by a black woman judge. Like, never. I'm talking about 4 rounds, 5 rounds tournaments, multiple years. There are debaters who, like, there are debaters I've coached in the past who have gone their entire 4-year career without that happening, right? Like, and that's, you know, is that a good thing? Is that something that we want to consider as a community? Is that something that is worthwhile? I think that those are conversations that are happening, and those are conversations that are important. And one last thing, and this is just goes back to the education question in terms of what types of education we have. I think summer institutes are really important in terms of trying to set a tone. And there's some institutes that do a better job than others of teaching about like argument engagement as opposed to argument avoidance, teaching how to deal with issues of race and gender in positive ways as opposed to the shortcuts that you were talking about in terms of like hit someone in the back of the head and run. There's some, like, so I think that those conversations are also important.
I think in terms of going back to the rules, first on judge diversity, I think it's incredibly problematic what Jonathan was talking about, that a female student of color may not be judged by a female student of color for years. That's a huge problem. I also think it benefits students who are white or from any position of privilege to be judged by people they may not interact with in their daily lives and may not be from their communities or on their the type of people who are on their teams. I think that's also very important, because going back to the broader political themes that sort of frame this discussion, I think the biggest problem in America right now, one of the biggest problems, is that we don't know how to, a lot of us don't know how to talk to people who are different from us. And debate provides a unique space for us to do that. And I think diversity in judging pools, more diversity in judging pools offers a great opportunity there, and is definitely something we need to work on. In terms of rules, I think on the public forum issue, the main concern to me is creating a round structure that is most conducive to a productive conversation in which arguments engage with each other. And I think having the consistency of a side-locked event where the affirmative goes first may help provide that. I think eliminating the grand crossfire, which I've never seen a productive grand crossfire in my life, and I think a lot of folks might agree with me on that, and adding that time to speeches to help make more fully developed, better structured arguments will lead to more productive discussions on important issues that are legible to judges and legible to all the students in the round. There's concern, I think, that public forum may lose its character, become too fast or too progressive in some way. I think going back to the issue of judging pools, as long as the public forum judging pool remains diverse in terms of the levels of debate experience in the judge pool, so it's not all coaches, there's a fair amount of parents, there's a fair amount of judges who have not seen a ton of debate rounds in their lives. As long as that type of diversity is maintained, I think the quote-unquote character of PF as a quote-unquote accessible event will be maintained.
And I was going to say, with PF, I think that it needs to figure out what it wants to be. And if the goal of PF is to be a parent, citizen judged event, if that is something that, because when you have institutes, when you have alumni who are judging, then you get specialization. The more you get specialization, the more that it becomes more like policy RLD. I mean, that's what happened to LD. Like, there's policy debate. LD became a lot like policy debate. And it became that way because of specialization. You have kids who competed in the activity, who judge the activity. Then you go to institutes, and you learn various things and a specialized knowledge. And you have two events that are really similar, right? Like, my LDers debate policy, and my policy debaters can debate LD, right? And we train them for that because we think that the formats have become, on certain levels, on certain circuits, fundamentally the same. If you're saying that public forum should, like, the difference to me between LD and policy now is that LD, to be an LDer, you have to debate all styles. Like, you have to be able to debate for parents, for policy judges, and for traditional Lincoln Douglas judges. Whereas if public forum wants to remain a public, an event, a debate event for citizens, then that's who your judging pool needs to be, and that needs to be a statement. Like, we're not going to have, like, judges who've judged the activity a lot. If you want experienced judges in PF, then it's going to change, and it's going to be something different.
I think that a lot of the question about PF and what it should be is also a lot about, like, what we expect out of the students. I think the biggest question at the Grand Crossfire, and don't get me wrong, I don't want to seem like a huge proponent of the Grand Crossfire. I don't love the Grand Crossfire. For every one great Grand Crossfire that I've seen 100 terrible ones. But if the goal is for it to be a community-judged activity, then the goal of the Grand Crossfire is to simulate what an actual community discussion is, an unstructured space where people are exchanging ideas in a productive manner and are expected to do so in a respectful way. I think where it falls apart is that students often don't understand that that's the expectation. They kind of want to get the last word in, or they want to have the loudest argument in that Grand Crossfire, and it becomes a very rude exchange that is not productive towards the end of the round. I think if we create a goal where the aim of the Grand Crossfire is to transition us from the summary period into the final focus with an actual discussion of what has already happened, not just like hammering fists until the judge thinks that one side is leading, then it becomes a more important part of the structure of PF. And on the note that you were saying about the institute's role and the judge's role in that environment, I think it is our there's an onus on us as judges and coaches to tell students that's what we're expecting. Otherwise, I don't know why the Grand Crossfire exists.
To that point specifically, I would say that we can teach them that skill in one-on-one instead of two-on-two, and it might be slightly more productive, but that's not what I was going to say. So back to judge diversity just for a second. I think it's important to bring back around that what Jonathan was speaking about earlier in terms of diversity with gender and ethnicity, I think the absolute same is true with styles of judges. So we're talking about the different styles and the way specialization occurs, but I think that too is something that happens at tournaments all the time. We see panels where you get into outrounds, and all of a sudden those outrounds are these three specialized judges that are former national champions or technical debaters. So you're forcing these later rounds to kind of be in a certain style. I think we need to be aware of not only gender and ethnicity diversity, but also judge style diversity, judge age diversity in those rounds. And almost more importantly, outside of tournaments, something I used to do, I taught for 7 years and had my own team, and we debated in front of the English teacher or the social studies teacher or the librarian, the media specialist. There are not enough students that are doing that on a regular basis at their schools. I think that every event from policy to POI should be able to perform on a regular basis and practice in front of as many different judges as possible in terms of age, race, gender, and level of experience with debate. And that's really how we're going to cultivate the most productive and competitive student bodies when we send them off from this activity.
So I think we're all now very much discussing what we can do to improve the diversity of this community and make it not only more reflective of the entire populace of our outside community, not just speech and debate, but also more inclusive and welcoming to every part of the larger community. So what can we do in speech and debate at tournaments as coaches when we're offering these opportunities to students to make it a more welcoming environment for a diverse crowd? Really anything that we can do.
Well, I would push back on the similarity between like racial and gender diversity and stylistic diversity. I think they're very different in different categories, probably should be discussed differently. Because I think that in terms of stylistic difference, I think that's an issue of tournament, right? There are local tournaments, we have a local CFL, Catholic Forensic League tournament, or league. That is going to be generally lay judge, parent judged. And it's going to be LD, but it's going to be lay judge, parent judge LD. And so I'll have my students trained there to be able to get lay judge, parent judge. Then there'll be other tournaments that have preferences. And in those preferences, then there are debaters who debate in ways where spreading is okay, right? And I think that's fine too, because I think that's a different skill, and I think that's a good skill set. But I think that not all tournaments need to be everything. And I think that that is up to, I think that as long as the local leagues, and that's why it kind of goes back to the beginning of the discussion, I think that local leagues are important. I think that, the Newark Debate Academy, it is the collection of high schools and middle schools, and it's an active league where basically my debate coach in high school, Brent Ferrand, created a local administrator to recruit local debate coaches, and train them, right? And so we have a really powerful, strong middle school debate league, and we have a strong local high school league. I think that when you're talking about being able to debate in front of your parents, or being able to debate in front of the teacher, yes, I do think those are important skills, but I don't think that that is like a one tournament must address to all kind of thing. I think that is a different tournaments, and different tournaments serve different purposes. And I think that's totally okay, right? And I think as coaches, we should send kids to different tournaments that we think can give them those experiences.
Just to clarify, what I was, first of all, I wasn't suggesting that or conflating the importance of one type of diversity over the other. I was just basically suggesting that I've seen a trend at some tournaments, especially national tournaments, where when you need 100 judges to judge prelims, that 80 of those could be parents. And then as we get through, and it's something that happens in Florida all the time, as you get to out rounds, they choose more specialized judges to judge the out rounds. So the debates continue to become faster and faster and faster and more specialized and more technical. And I think that, sure, there are different tournaments that have different styles, but I think that we as a community can do a better job to make sure that we're not just saying that the further along students get in a specific competition, the more technical those debates need to be.
And I think that would be, and especially if the people who go to that tournament don't necessarily like that result, then I think that the way to solve those issues of tournament competition and stylistic inclusion is directly with those tournaments. Like if it's your state tournament, then those will be the conversation, those coach conversations of how do you choose judges for the out rounds? Do you have preference? Do you have prefs? Or should we label judges as, these are citizen judges, these are more experienced judges, and do you at that tournament want to lobby to have that diversity? Or would you stop going to that tournament and just choose other tournaments to go to? But I think that those are tournament by tournament, good conversations, but tournament by tournament conversations about what the character of the event is. And I think, I'm assuming you're talking about public forum?
Oh, we see it all the time across events.
Okay.
I think one of the most important things that we come out of this, I think, is judge training, and making sure. And by judge training, I'm not talking about, you have to understand these particular arguments or whatever. I think even sometimes it's just teaching people the rules of the game and how the game is played a little bit, and working through those things, because I think sometimes we just hand people a ballot and say, well, you can judge this, it's fine. I think, if we made people more comfortable feeling like they could actually go into a round and understand things, and that you talk to young people about the fact that now they have a parent in the back of the room. Well, what's the first assumption they make? Is that, well, this person is not all that bright and really doesn't understand things, and we've got to talk very slow and very loud for them to understand. It's like, no, a lot of these people have college degrees, right, and they're educated, and they can make decisions, and then they can evaluate things, and convince our kids that they're not just down here, they're as good up here. And sometimes I prefer those people as opposed to somebody else. I guess as far as diversity is concerned too, I've had the unique opportunity, I think, in the last few years to coach a lot more young women than I have young men. And I've become much more aware of some of the issues and some of the challenges that young women have in this activity, and how trying to break some barriers for them is just as difficult as, you know, as the other forms of diversity that are out there. That we expect young women to act a particular way and to debate a particular way, and if they don't, well then, you know, that's just not the way things are supposed to be done. And it's like, you know, I have purposely at some tournaments, in fact, we just talked about this about a month ago with some of my seniors. She said one of the most meaningful things I did for her was at a local tournament when she was a sophomore, and I was showing the ballots. In Texas, they give us the ballots after every round, and we were finished with preliminary rounds, and the kids wanted to see their ballots, so I was giving them their ballots, and I didn't hand some of the ballots to this young woman, and she said, "Well, where are my round 2 and 3 ballots?" And I said, "You don't need to read those." I said, because the stuff that's on that ballot you don't need to see, and I disagree violently with what this person says, and you don't need to read that, you know, and she said that was a really defining moment for her, because she knew that I was going to be an advocate for her, that I was going to in some ways protect her and make darn sure that people weren't going to say things to her or do things to her that just were not acceptable. So anyway,
I think in terms of what tournaments can do to do more to create a diverse judging pool, and along those lines, diverse judging panels, is start to use the tournament as more of a platform. So a lot of times when I'm tabbing a PF tournament, I can speak more about PF on this issue because I think this becomes a different conversation when we get into the world of mutual judge preferences or a large amount of strikes. But when I'm tabbing a PF tournament, I try, when I'm putting together out rounds panels, to make sure that at the very least, depending on what types of judges are in the pool, that I don't have 3 white men judging a debate. There are different ways to do this. The options are sometimes more or less limited depending on the tournament. But I realize this is the first time I've said outside of a tab room that I make this effort, and that we make this effort at a lot of tournaments in the Northeast. I think tournaments can probably do a better job using their voice as a platform to advocate and raise awareness on these issues and explain what they're doing and share best practices. So if you think about, if you're running a tournament digitally and you send out an email to every participant or every coach in that tournament explaining how you're doing things like this, and explaining, or maybe you're asking for information on judges as to whether they enhance diversity or something along these lines, you're sending a message to the community that this is important to you, this is important to your tournament, and this is something that we all need to work on. The more we share that, the more we talk about that, and the more I think different tournament directors share best practices and facilitate conversations on diversity like the Blake tournament did this year, I think the better job we're going to be doing. So I don't have an answer for how to make the judging better at out rounds at every tournament, and I doubt there is a universalizable answer to that, but I do think the more we talk about it, the more tournaments reach out, as this tournament has, to ask about diversity enhancing judges, and the more we advocate for the issue, the better off we're going to be.
So I think all of that is true, but honestly, as coaches, a small percentage of the time we spend around our kids and with our kids has to do with tournaments. The majority of the time we spend with our kids is practicing, traveling to the tournament, after the tournament having dinner. And if you want, really, in my opinion, to try to encourage diverse groups of kids to join your team and to like be a part of this activity, that is not about what happens at tournaments as much as it's what happens just when you're spending time with your team. My team is unique because I think I had one white student this year I didn't have any black students, but I have a lot of Palestinian students. I have a lot of Indian students. I have a lot of Persians, Israelis, my kids are from all over the place. Chinese, Vietnamese, got them from all over. And one of the unique things that I've kind of learned to deal with, as an example, this morning at 4:30, for those of you that didn't know, there was a big cricket match between Pakistan and India. And that was all the talk yesterday. Who's going to win, Pakistan or India? Pakistan hasn't won in I don't know how many years, and there's no way that that's going to happen. So this morning at 4:30, a whole bunch of the kids got up and went to one of the rooms and watched the game together. And guess what? Pakistan won. So all the kids that were Indian that were giving all the Pakistani kids shit all day and yesterday, they got it back today. But it kind of becomes about, if you want to get people involved, they have to have fun. They have to enjoy it. They have to feel like, for kids, it's not always about what am I going to get out of this 20 years from now. It's what am I going to get out of this right now. And building community with your kids and teaching them to interact and to enjoy one another and to recognize that there's not, like, for the Pakistani kids and the Indian kids to get along and the Palestinian and Israeli kids to get along. Like, that is just a matter of getting to know each other and just spending time together. And same with male, female. It's about recognizing that there's value in everybody. And finding what that value is helps them to want to be a part of something. And then it's once they become a part of something, then you start to teach them the skills, and then the skills teach them to be more successful. They have more success. They get more involved. They bring other kids in. Like, that's really how the dynamic of a team works. And as a community, that's really a large part of where I think sometimes we forget to focus. We get so focused on the event and forget about the team. And I think sometimes that's why we lose a lot of our kids.
I'm going to bring it back to that in 1 second, but I do want to say that we're going to invite audience questions at the end of this. So start thinking of some questions that you might have for this panel. We're only going to have time for a few, but if you have your question, I think just maybe raise your hand, and we have papers that can come around, and we'll go through those, and you'll be able to ask your question. So I think that a very common thread that is run through this part of the conversation is transparency. It's conversations between coaches. It's tournaments talking about their practices. It's coaches talking about the unique diversity issues that they face on their teams, and also how they deal with all of those issues. So a question that I'd like to ask in a different format than we've been discussing, I'd just like each of you to say one thing that you think coaches can have a better conversation about, and how that conversation can happen. This is more on transparency. So just like Rhonda was saying, one example of how you encourage your kids to think more actively about the diversity on their team and about being welcoming and about interacting with tournaments and other students to create a better environment. Marty, you want to start?
In terms of what conversations we should be having with coaches?
Yeah, I mean, I think that what we've now said is that coaches aren't having this conversation enough. We need to all, as a community of coaches and of students and teachers, be talking about what we all do and share our best practices. So I guess just what is one of your best practices that we can start setting as an example?
Yeah, Megan, can you start?
Sure. So this is what I was actually about to reference anyway. I think that we can connect our students to underserved populations. And I'll give you an example of that, and this is the only way I know how to share this example. One of the things that we started this year was actually working with our students at the youth treatment centers. They're juvenile detention facilities. These students have been convicted of nonviolent crimes, but they are anywhere from 13 to 18 years old. And we've actually started debate programs at all of them. And it's been really, really remarkable. We have about 35 students. They started competing at tournaments. They are, they've gone from being convicted of a crime and in a treatment center for 6 months to a year to the only time they actually get out and get to see sunlight is when they're coming to a debate competition. But the really cool thing is that we are actually having our students that are at our traditional high schools work with these students. And I can't tell you enough the magic that we've kind of seen happen. You've taken, it's completely different genders, ethnicities. We're mixing everybody together, which I know has been a common theme that we're talking about. But we're really allowing two different populations that would have never mixed mix in a format that is allowing them to talk about issues that are important in completely different ways to the different groups. So that's something I would say. I don't know that I would call it, I guess, a best practice. It is for us. But if you can find a population or an underserved group in your community that you can connect your students with, I can't tell you the magic that you'll be able to see happen. And we've seen so much improvement from these kids that we're actually reaching out to, and just as much from the students at our traditional schools that are helping them.
I think one of the things I've tried to do on my team is open my students' ears and to how other folks might hear what comes out of their mouths. So I don't have any black students on my team, and I teach at an all-boys school. So a lot of times my students lack they don't always have interactions with people who are of an opposite gender or from who are not white. So what I've tried to do as a coach and also in the classroom is be sensitive to what they are saying and how they are approaching issues as if I were not coming from a position of privilege, and try to take what I know and raise awareness among my students to how other populations might hear the words they're saying, the arguments they are making, and help them think about the implications of how they talk, both in debate rounds and as people.
I like what you were saying in terms of, and because this is something that has always been an issue in terms of recruiting for me personally. I know that there are a lot of kids who don't see themselves as debaters. I know that it's often, and many integrated schools talk about a problem of recruiting black debaters, Latino debaters, and certain schools, they have trouble recruiting women debaters. Like there's some schools, I thought they were all male schools, but they weren't. Like when we go to the tournament, we're like, oh, okay, they're women at the school. It's a co-ed school. I didn't know that because we just saw their debaters, and their debaters were traditionally all male. But I noticed that I have to often go out and recruit directly, and there are kids who do not see themselves as debaters, and they would not see themselves as debaters, right? Because everything in society is telling them that this intellectual activity is not for you. Like, you're good, catch a ball, run with it. That's what you should do. And they're told this over and over again, but they're not told, like, hey, I think that you would be good at this event. And often those are conversations that you have with their coaches. Like, I've had conversations with basketball coaches when, like, you know, they're like, no, they have to do this. They can't. So I would have conversations with coaches. I have conversations with students and recruit. But often recruiting requires you to have conversations that let people know that, no, you would be a good debater. Like, you should see yourselves as a debater, because debaters are critical thinkers. This is why I think that you would be good at it. And often that becomes successful. But often it is looking at your team, looking at who's not there and who's not represented, and saying, is this a problem? And then going to rectify that through having direct conversations.
I would agree with that. I think sometimes it's easy to get so involved in the kids that you have come to you that it's hard to get, for me at least, I get so caught up in what I'm already doing that I probably don't take the time I should to go out and try to recruit people from other walks of life to come onto the debate team. But I do think some of that does happen organically when you build a really, you know, like, people are drawn to teams. They want to be a part of something bigger than themselves. And that's why, you know, sports teams, a lot of people want to be in sports because they're a family and all that kind of stuff. And I think we can do the same thing. Just because it's an intellectual activity doesn't mean that people don't have emotional needs. And sometimes I think that people who have maybe a little bit more difficult situation than some of the ones that are traditionally on the team. They aren't on the team because they have emotional needs that they don't think are going to be met. And I think that it's important for, if our kids are inclusive and they're aware of that everything isn't always in everybody else's world the way it is in their own world, and they learn to be more inclusive, I do think organically that draws people into your team. It's really about what opportunities we have. And so any way that we can go about getting more of an opportunity to touch a few more lives, then that's really what we're about.
I think any conversation, you have to do a whole lot of introspection and take a look at who and what you are, and not only how you coach, but also what you are open to, and quite frankly, what you're not open to. You know, you talk to coaches every once in a while, you say, well, I hate critiques, and then you start giving them arguments, and they go, well, you know, that's an okay argument, and then you go, well, that's a critique. You know, and they go, well, no, it's not. You go, well, yeah, it is. You know, and you start talking, and I think it's what are you open to, and having those conversations. You know, there were arguments I didn't understand, and I've gone to people like Jonathan or Daryl Birch or you know, Iggy Evans and people like that and say, can you explain this to me? And it's an eye-opener for me. It's like, wow. I mean, there's a whole bunch of arguments that now I'm just fascinated by because I've taken the time to actually ask the question. And I think the more you do that, the more you become good for your students, and you begin to understand a lot more about that. So I think just opening yourself up sometimes and doing that introspection, and it's okay sometimes to look at, and there's just some kids every once in a while you just want to slap them. I mean, from the standpoint of they start complaining about their coach doesn't understand arguments, their coach doesn't understand this and everything. You want to turn to them and say, did they take you to a tournament? Shut up. You know, I mean, it's a young, grateful little, you know, jerk, you know, that kind of stuff. Because it's like, if you're doing that, if you're getting kids those opportunities and everything, you're doing what you need to do. And I know some people that started out, and what they had for this activity was a passion for this activity that they learned as they went along. And if you don't know as much of your students, well, you're not the one debating, you know, so that's okay. You know, if you understand arguments better than they do, they're in trouble, you know. And that's what you have to take out of that is to do that, I think. And I think be much more open. Be willing to kind of do that introspection and say, what do I need to do to be better? So,
I think that although there were very different words used, all of the answers from this panel basically came down to that, introspection. I think that these kinds of conversations are the only way that we can create a better future of debate. And that's not to say that we have something that is inherently flawed right now. But I don't think that anyone on this panel or anyone in this room can claim that they're perfect in creating the best environment for their team, or thinking about diversity in every possible way, or considering all of these different variables that go into maximizing the educational experience and the ability of this community to create good citizens. But it all comes down to introspection and thinking of more ways that we can move towards that goal of creating a better space. So what I would advocate for, as kind of a summary to this conversation, is have these kinds of conversations at tournaments. Find other coaches that are certainly struggling through a lot of the same problems that you are as a teacher and as a coach, and even as a student, and they might not be talking about it. And you might not be talking about it until you sit down with them in the judge lounge and you say, like, hey, I faced a very interesting issue. How would you deal with something like that on your team? I don't think you necessarily have to talk to someone that's been coaching for longer than you have, nor do you have to talk to someone that's younger and, you know, a first year out on the block. I think that we all can lend something to that larger conversation. So unless you all have anything else to add, as a quick note, we want to open up the floor for audience questions. Do we have a few questions that have come up? Okay, why don't we just form a line here, and I'll get you a microphone, and we can. Great. Sure.
I find it so hard to try and talk. Sorry, my name's Brooks, by the way, Brooks Varela. No, but I find it so hard to get people out there into speech and debate. and I see talent all around me. And, you know, I went to my high school graduation, and a kid gave a speech, and it was just like, whoa, he needs to be in speech and debate. You know, what can I do to talk him into it? But I actually wanted to ask you, what were some more techniques that you had to try and get to, you know, kids that don't necessarily see this as something that they can do with themselves?
That's all right. For the most part, it's having conversations with either me directly, having my team go out and have conversations, because often the best recruiters are the actual debaters themselves. And if they know, you know, look, we need to recruit, we need to find more people, they will go out and they will find people within their networks of friends. They will go out. Like the best recruiter of freshmen are seniors, because a lot of freshmen, they're looking for what they want to do and who they want to be like. Seniors have this aura of being seniors and cool. And seniors are great recruiters as well. Public performances, that becomes very important too. Like, can they see debates in public? Do you advertise like when you've done well to the rest of the school population, so that you're actually a part of the school community and the school life? There, for years, debaters weren't, included in pep rally. Pep rally is when all the athletics teams get out and you're like, yay, right? This year, the vice principal just on a whim was like, hey, we need to recognize debaters. And so now I was like, yeah, that's a good idea. So we're going to have a little pep rally thing in terms of debaters. So it's all about building the culture of your team. We even have a team chant. What are you? A debater. What do you do? Debate. Who are you? Chargers, and scream it, right? Like, it's fun. But it's also some of those things that like build culture around your team, that it has team spirit. So like I tell my debaters, you bleed blue and gold. Those are our school colors. And so those are things that really start to, when you build a culture of your team so that people are proud to be debaters, they hear what other debaters have done. You get recognition from people who are not debaters, who are your administrators, like administrative support, or your local politicians and parents lauding debate. Then I think that helps to send signals to people who might not have thought they were a debater, who you might not have reached, but were reached by the pep rally. They were reached by the alumni. They were reached because they heard the chant, like, what are you, a debater? What do you do? Debate. Who are you? Chargers. And they see kids get into that, and it's like, what? So all of those things are potentially there, and it takes time, right? It takes time to build a culture. Like, the team at Newark Science is 37 years old. I was not the first coach there. I was a student actually at Newark Science a long time ago, right? And so these things are built over years. Like, there are a lot of teachers who had conversations with a lot of administrators and a lot of politicians, and that's why we are publicly funded. We are well supported within our community. I actually don't even teach English anymore. I teach debate because debate was considered valuable in our school. They saw the direct connection between debate and test scores, and they saw kids who started debating in 7th grade did better on not just the regular standardized test, but did better in AP courses and IB courses, and were able to push the scores of the school overall. So I didn't even suggest teaching debate as a course. My administrator came to me and thought he had to talk me into it because he saw the results. So that's what I mean by, like, build the culture. It takes time, and try to push like the good things that debate do to a bunch of people. Get your kids to recruit, because recruiting is all the time and it's constant. So that's what I would say in terms of my advice.
I just have one quick addendum to that. You talked a lot about having a debate program at the school as a class. I think that's supremely important. A lot of school districts in the country have started adding debate as a class. But I'm now going to look directly at the camera and to our live audience and our recorded audience and say, if you are a debate teacher, if you teach speech and debate and you are a coach and your school doesn't already have a debate class, go to your school's administration and say, this is something that will help our students. This is something that will increase their test scores. This is something that will increase their ability to get into college. This is something that will increase their opportunities across the board. And one great thing that the NSDA, the National Speech and Debate Association, provides is the resources that you can take to your administration the hard facts that show how important speech and debate is. So I advocate to you at home to go to your administration with that information and say, we should teach debate as a course. We need to open students' eyes to everything that debate introduces into their lives. So with that, my little hard pitch, do we have another question from the audience?
I have a question over here. So going back to the topic of increasing quality of arguments by having conversations with the debaters following rounds, do y'all foresee any problems with the current standard of not having oral feedback within rounds in giving accurate feedback after the rounds? I feel as though when I have debaters that they get ballots, first off, you have judges that don't want to give feedback on the ballots. But second off, it's really hard to communicate a lot of what goes on in the round on paper. Do you all think that that is something going forward that's going to improve debate by expanding oral critiques?
I think that's fine. I think the ballot still serves a purpose because, as a coach, kids come back and tell me what happened in the round, then I start reading the ballot, or I'll talk to the judge, and it's like, well, not really, and everything. I think the oral critique is important as long as we keep in mind as far as who that oral critique is for. I've listened to oral critiques where we get into the minutia of the argument and why I saw things the way I saw it, and et cetera, et cetera. And a lot of times it's almost a reconstruction of the round. And it's like, and not only that, it's like, I'm not interested in what you thought, and what you think is a good argument, or what you think the strength of how did these kids debate? I mean, it's like, did this student, every once in a while you want to look at a judge and say, did they make that argument? Because if the other team didn't make that argument, you're the one making the argument, not the kids. So I think sometimes you have to take a look at the value of the oral critique and if it's educational, that's great. But if it's just this, I'm going to show you how smart I am, I'm not interested in that.
I think I'm generally a huge proponent of tournaments encouraging oral feedback, but I definitely agree with Dave that it can go in the wrong direction sometimes. And I think in terms of maximizing the quality of feedback after the round, it's on us as coaches in a couple of ways. First, we need to train our judges as coaches and leagues and tournament officials or what have you to write good ballots. So that if a tournament does not allow oral critiques, our judges know how to write on a ballot in a way that is effective for students. I've seen a lot of constructive ballots. I've seen ballots that contradict what students say happened in a round, and that's incredibly useful. But I've also seen like 2 pieces of feedback on a ballot without much reason for decision, and that's not constructive. So I think written feedback can be great, and we need to train our judges to give that well. I also think, and this goes back to an issue that Jonathan was discussing with first-year outs judging debate rounds earlier, coaches who have been in the activity for a few years need to take an active mentorship role with the first and second and third year outs who are judging debate rounds and coaching debaters. I am still coaching today because of the mentorship I received from the coach that I worked for, Dave Yastrzemski, while I was in college. That mentorship helped me become a better coach and a better person, I think, and it helped me avoid becoming the person in the back of the room in an oral critique who debated the round for himself rather than gave feedback to the students. I think in order to maximize the quality of oral critiques and make sure judges are doing work to enhance the quality of what is going on in the round, coaches who have been around need to mentor younger coaches and ensure that they're doing that work when they're judging debate rounds.
I was going to add one more thing really quickly. I agree that the onus is certainly on the coaches for those two reasons, but I also think that the onus is on the students. One of the main reasons why a lot of the judges don't want to give oral critiques or tournaments stop having oral critiques is because they get uncomfortable because students are not receptive. They're sometimes rude. They're dismissive. They argue. It depends on obviously what type of debate you're in a lot of times. But I think that as coaches, we need to make make sure that we are teaching our students to be extremely respectful, to ask for feedback if there's the opportunity to do that in a non-pressure situation, not why did I lose, but can you give me some things to think about for the next round? I always tell students that if there's not open or oral critiques permitted at a tournament, that they can find me later, and I'm very receptive to that. If you see me sitting on a bench, doing some work on my laptop and I judged you 2 rounds ago, I'm happy to pull up my flow and talk to you about it. And I think we can create that culture, but we have to teach our students how to navigate that culture effectively. So it's not only how to take criticism in round, but how to be able to ask for that appropriately afterwards. And that can even extend to the written ballot as well. Making sure our students are reading ballots, that they're not getting upset about them, that they're not attacking judges later saying, why did you write this on my ballot? I do think a lot of that responsibility and a lot of that culture can be trained by the way that the competitors handle coach feedback, both written and oral.
Yeah, I think that there's no such thing as a bad oral critique, in that you can always learn from it no matter what the judge says. You learn about the judge, you learn about your arguments, you learn about your interaction with your arguments. Often, you're not going to, if you lose, you're not going to agree with what the judge says, or you might not agree with what the judge says. Half the time you're probably not, because you probably think you won. But I think that what you can get from it is what was in the judge's head when they were making the decision. How did they hear what you said? Was any part of your speech in their decision? Did they take into account what you said and didn't? So you can learn right then, because if you wait till after the tournament's over and you see the ballot, you've already lost some rounds, right? I think it's so counterproductive. I hate not having oral critiques, because even when I get the translation from my student about what the judge said, I can learn from that translation about, based on what was said and what wasn't said or reported back, that okay, so maybe we need to work on this. Maybe we need another example here. Maybe this wasn't clear, right? So I think that if you go into the assumption that, generally speaking, you had a chance to get that judge, right? Then what can you do to communicate better? Absolutely with oral critiques. Absolutely love them. To me, there's no such thing as a bad oral critique, even if it's something that's wow, this person, if it's this person hated everything that you said, well, we probably wouldn't want them as a judge if they have prefs, not to pref them because of that. But generally speaking, you're usually able to get a judge's ballot, and usually it's something that you've done, and you can start to correct that by hearing what they say and hearing how they interacted with you. So I'm totally for that.
And I would add to that one of the benefits of an oral critique is obviously getting the opportunity to find out how other people see things. I think one of the things this is a really good exercise. Have your kids take a really controversial speech from a politician, any politician, pick one, have them read the liberal media side and the conservative media side, both accounts of what was said, and then have them read the speech. It's really interesting how both are really not exactly what was said. And I think that's a skill that they learn in debate that they can take with them for the rest of their lives. People are going to hear what sometimes connects with their own experiences. And that's where all of the, that's why they didn't hear the argument that you thought you gave. So think about the different experiences and the different, it's like Megan said, the different kinds of judges that you have, different ages, different backgrounds, whatever the things are that make them the way that they are, that make them think the way that they do, you have to learn in the real world to interact with those people. So you need to be able to understand how to communicate with them effectively and not alienate them. And sometimes the oral critique is a really good way to make that happen. Having said that, there also needs to be something on the ballot other than oral, because as a coach, I can't help them if I'm only getting their side of what the oral critique said. So.
Yeah, I think that the written ballot, just to sum things up, is kind of the way that the coach interacting with whatever the reason for decision was, and the description of how that judge interpreted the argument, so that they can then talk to the students about how to change their depiction of the argument they're making. But I do think that oral critiques are important enough that tournaments should consider where they go in the schedule. The worst thing that I've ever heard at a tournament was a PF round should not be longer than 45 minutes long. It should be 45 minutes, including the judge turning in the ballot, walking from the round over to the tab room. And it's so counterproductive to the educational ability of this event. I mean, that leaves no room for a conversation. And yes, like Megan said, judges can make the advocacy that you can come find me after the round. I will be around the tournament. Come find me. We'll have a discussion about the round. But I think tournaments can do a better job of saying, well, we need to create our schedule assuming that judges should talk to students about the round that they just had. I think we can take one more question, and then they might kick us out of the room. So see what happens. Any other questions?
As a coach, I just wanted to know kind of what are some of your best tips or techniques that you use for coaching students in debate. I'm a speech coach that is starting to tackle debate, so any input that you have. I loved the idea, like reading the different speeches from a politician. That's great. So anything like that that you have that would be beneficial for coaches or students.
I would say that one of the easiest entry points is extemporaneous debate, which we start later this week, or SPAR debate. So spontaneous argumentation, little debates. We do this from 5th grade to 12th grade all across the county. So something as simple as like cubed ice versus crushed ice, which is one of my favorite debates. But it's really great, and it gets really heated really quickly. But you can take that to anything about, whether we should have universal health care or repeal Obamacare. It can be something really simple and trivial to something really serious. And I think that it's a very underrated form of debate, but it's something that, you get the speech kids in right away, and all of a sudden they have these opinions on things. And especially if you provide topics that they're interested in, a lot of times we'll have a HI versus DI debate in the classroom, and that's something that's really easy. So just very simple structure. It can be 7 2-minute speeches, right? Whatever works for you, but just getting them up on their feet and kind of getting in that initial competitive debate mindset is a really easy way. But then I'll also plug the NSDA resources. The NSD resource package is phenomenal. We direct coaches there all of the time, and there are tons. Every webinar that they've ever had are stored on there. So you can go watch those webinars. You can show your students those webinars. If you can't get access to something, you can absolutely email someone from the NSDA and say, hey, I'm trying to teach my students this. What resources do you have? And they'll respond and send you hyperlinks. So I would say that utilize the NSDA and then just get them debating as quickly as possible on their feet.
Now, are you starting a debate program, or you
No,
just?
I've been coaching. I'm starting
Right.
to coach debate. We have a debate team.
Okay.
So it's more
So for those kids, a lot of it is for me, so many students see a topic and they automatically try to take an argument they've run before, or that is their favorite argument, and it's like a square peg, round hole, that kind of thing. And I think I always talk to my students about, well, we can, they'll start right off the bat when they get the topic and say, well, we can run this, we can run that. It's like, no, take a step back, do some research, do some quick reading on the topic, like find 2 or 3 articles that do a good job of explaining what are the issues, and let those articles direct where your arguments are going to go and to give you ideas. Let the literature help you decide what arguments you're going to make. And I think a lot of times, a lot of people want to go this way with arguments rather than this way. And I would try to go this way a little bit more, because I think once you get spread out, the more arguments you put in a debate round, the more likely it is that they're going to have a hard time covering them. Keep the number of arguments limited. And like I said, do the research. Do the work. And find credible sources that and academics that are writing about the topic. Use the big, get away from the Time and Newsweek and everything, and look at foreign policy or foreign affairs or some of those, the Brookings Institute and some of those think tanks and everything. Get into some of those and some of those analyses, because the more they do that, you're looking at some people that are saying, well, if you're going to talk about this topic, here's what you need to know. And I think that's probably a good place to start.
I think a lot of coaching debate in a practice setting comes in terms of creating structures for students to be debating when you cannot possibly be in the room watching 18 students debate at the same time. So if you can establish that every student is debating a practice round from 3 to 4 on Wednesday afternoon, and you float between those, I'm not gonna do the math on 18, X number of rooms, make some notes on each student, and give them feedback on the end of the day, or give them feedback in between speeches and things like that. Creating structures where they are speaking, giving each other feedback, and getting a bit of feedback from you as well, I think is really important, even though it's uncomfortable to not be seeing everything from every student. I also think one of the best things to do is just checking in with students at tournaments in between rounds, asking them how the round went, what they won on, what they lost on, what they think they need to work on. And one of the things that I think is more common in debate than in speech is doing speech redos in between rounds and working with students at the tournament and giving them instant feedback. Those two structures in practice and in checking in with them at tournaments, I think, is a really great way to build the apparatus of a debate program. And I think debate is a lot about apparatus.
I would say like the first thing would be to focus on basics, like the argument, like what is an argument, all the other stuff. And then I would say the second and third thing would be to judge rounds and watch rounds. The more rounds you judge, the better you get as a coach. The more rounds you watch, the better you get to be able to coach your kids. So those are the three things I would give you.
Don't be afraid to judge, because yeah, you may make a quote unquote wrong decision, but it really isn't because they didn't convince you. I mean, I've judged around for a lot of years, and I'm becoming increasingly annoyed with young people that look at you and go, yeah, you have to adapt to me, not the other way around. And it's like, no, I don't. Look at me. Do I look like a person that's going to buy that? I'm not. So it's like, and I'm not afraid to look at some kid and say, no, I didn't understand that argument. You didn't articulate it well. And they said, well, why didn't you do? Well, because you didn't make it important. If you said, look at this part, I probably would have, but you didn't. So, sorry. Not sorry. So anyway.
Rhonda, this question started with your brilliant idea about interpretation of political speeches. Do you have another one now that a question has come out of that idea? You don't have to if not, but I really thought that was a great idea for students.
I just really encourage, it's kind of as you started, the political climate seems a little more heated than I think it has been in a long time. And I think a lot of that is the unwillingness for people to listen to what other people are saying. I really think there is a lot more common ground than what you would believe if you listen to all of the newscasters. And I think that it's, our kids learn from what they see. They don't learn from what we tell them. They learn from what we show them. Actions speak louder than words. And if we can learn to show them, well, listen to what you just said. Whether you agree, whether I as a coach agree with them or not, I'm going to play devil's advocate, and we're going to talk about the other side of the issue. And I think it is just really important on really all issues for them to be able to look at various perspectives. And if we can't do that, I think we really need to maybe reconsider what we're trying to get them to learn.
So I think that what this all comes down to is that what we've been talking about today is not an end-all be-all discussion that ends when we leave this room. I think it's an ongoing conversation. The future of anything is always about the conversations that start about what that thing should be. And it's our responsibility as coaches, as students, as members of the speech and debate community and the larger community to keep having conversations about how to make things just a little bit better. If you can share an idea with a coach that you think will help their team, that brings a huge benefit to every student they touch. And I think that the biggest thing that we talk about is that we are a speech and debate community. We're not independent coaches out there. We're not independent students out there. And I think too often we think of each other as competing factions rather than all people working towards the common goal of educating students and helping them find a place in the world be that a unique political time or just another time in history. So I'd like to thank the panel for starting that, or for continuing that conversation today. So thank you all so much for participating in this. And I'd like to ask all coaches out there to keep having this conversation within your own teams and within the rest of the community. I'd also like to thank the National Speech and Debate Association for creating the opportunity for this kind of discussion to happen. These town halls are an essential part of the continuing education of everyone that we interact with. I'd like to give a special thank you to the NSDA's Board of Directors and its office staff who work very hard to put on this tournament and to create the space that allows us to keep growing. Finally, I'd like to thank the technical team for making this available to the live stream and recorded audience at home, and for all of you watching at home for engaging in this kind of discussion. So thank you all very much for coming, and I look forward to having this conversation with you as the years go on. Thank you.